Bundle up and ready your ice axes as we delve into these astonishing frozen finds. Let's begin with number 15, an entire mountain range. In 1958, a Soviet expedition uncovered an entire mountain range. Buried under 600 meters of ice in Antarctica, the Gamburtsev mountain range is absolutely massive. It extends for about 1,250 kilometers and has peaks as high as 3,390 meters in altitude. This makes the mountain range about as large as the European Alps. Yet despite its size, its hard-to-reach location under ice means that scientists know pretty much nothing about its features. Number 14. Gold. While most gold is located underground, melting glaciers have revealed new deposits. During the last ice age, glaciers often transported gold-bearing rocks. Some of those golden rocks have become frozen inside the glaciers. And while the gold is usually scattered throughout as sediment, they've begun to reveal significant quantities of gold when the glacier melts. As global warming continues, glacial streams will likely see an uptick in gold volume, allowing some prospectors to strike it rich if they get the timing just right. Number 13. A new dinosaur species. In 1986, Argentinian geologists Eduardo Olivero and Roberto Scasso found a new species of dinosaur. On an expedition to Antarctica's James Ross Island, they found the bones of an ankylosaur under the ice. And while it took an entire decade to excavate the fossil thanks to the ground frost and the harsh weather, they uncovered a new species that's now called Antarctopelta, or Antarctic shield in English. To date, this one fossil is the only specimen of the species that's ever been found. Number 12. Yucca the mammoth. In 2010, a group of Siberian tusk hunters came across one of the world's most incredible Ice Age relics. Known as Yucca, she was a woolly mammoth that roamed the icy tundra about 39,000 years ago. She likely met her end after falling into a swamp and getting stuck, and it's due to this unique position that her lowered body was almost perfectly preserved. In fact, it's in such good condition that scientists were able to extract flowing blood. As it turns out, that mammoth blood has a natural antifreeze. Yucca is now displayed in Moscow and would certainly be worth visiting on the next trip to the city. Number 11. A box of jewels. In 2013, a French alpinist was hiking across the glacier on Mont Blanc when he spotted a metal box in the ice. The box said, "Made in India," and upon opening it, he found it filled with about 100 colorful gems consisting of a mix of sapphires, emeralds, and rubies. Upon further investigation, it was discovered that the jewels had come from a crashed Indian Airlines flight from either 1950 or 1966. However, despite searching, authorities were unable to find the original owner. As a result, the decision was made to split the jewels in half with both the alpinist and the owners of the land, leading to the alpinist going home with a cool $340,000. Number 10. Grasshoppers. So, while grasshoppers and glaciers are two things that don't seem very compatible, you can get two of them in one in the U.S. state of Montana. Located within the Beartooth Mountains of Custer National Forest, the so-called Grasshopper Glacier is far different than the typical white glaciers. That's because it's got a grayish color, and this is because it has tens of millions of locusts located inside of it. Now, I'm not entirely sure how they got in there, but there are a couple of theories. The most popular is that centuries ago, a swarm of billions of them were migrating over the Rocky Mountains when they suddenly were trapped by a massive winter storm. The ice then froze some of the trapped specimens in time, creating the incredible sight that's there today. Now, Grasshopper Glacier, as it came to be known, caught the attention of scientists after being discovered in the early 1900s by geologist J.P. Kimball. When he sent samples of the insect species to the U.S. Bureau of Entomology in 1914, it was discovered that they were Rocky Mountain locusts. This was a species that went extinct over a century ago, likely due to their seeds being overrun by the plows of farmers in the American West. Thus, this discovery was a scientific treasure, as the freezing led to locusts being very well preserved. And the Grasshopper Glacier isn't the only locust-filled glacier around. In fact, until the late 20th century, finding frozen grasshopper remains was pretty common. However, lower snowfall rates since the late 1980s and higher temperatures have caused many similar glaciers to melt. So, if you want to see Grasshopper Glacier for yourself, I'd suggest making the trip sooner rather than later. Now, getting there is quite the trek. After all, you have to use an off-road vehicle for part of the way, and then trek for several hours, with this often being in the face of bad weather. And it is because of this that the glacier is only considered to be accessible from late July to September, making it a difficult, yet worthwhile site to visit. Number 9. Allen Hills 84001. While the meteorite that wiped out the dinosaurs may be the most famous space rock, Allen Hills 84001 is a close second. Discovered in the Allen Hills icefield of Antarctica in 1984, the 1.9-kilogram igneous rock is thought to have crystallized from magma on Mars about 4.5 billion years ago, and later to have been shocked and altered, perhaps by one or more nearby meteoroid or asteroid impacts, into what it is today. By our estimates, it was formed as part of the crust on Mars about 4 billion years ago. It stayed there until about 17 million years ago, and then after an asteroid hit Mars, it went spinning into space. From there, it zipped around for many years before eventually landing in Antarctica about 13,000 years ago. While this makes the rock old and interesting, its age is far from its most controversial attribute. You see, in 1996, NASA scientists who carried out microscopic and chemical analyses on the meteorite made a shocking suggestion: that the strange carbonates in the meteorite had been produced by Martian microorganisms. After all, the carbonate grains that were observed are associated with organic compounds and contain minute crystals of iron minerals similar in size and shape to those produced by bacteria. If this hypothesis was true, this would mean that, in all likelihood, there was life on Mars. Given we haven't found definitive proof of that so far, this would have been, to put it lightly, a big deal. However, in subsequent investigations, other scientists refuted these claims. They instead said the carbonate grains could be explained by non-biological process. In 2022, these naysayers were proven right, as an authoritative report in the Journal of Science confirmed that the carbonate grains were not signs of life. Instead, they were created by water. Now, this shouldn't dash your hopes yet. After all, there is still good science that suggests that Mars may have once been hospitable to life. However, given the planet's current state, the chance of any life being found on Mars today is slim to none. And while this makes this piece of space rock a lot less exciting, it can still be visited today at the Smithsonian Museum of Natural History. Number 8. A baby mammoth. Canada's Yukon Territory is known for its gold deposits, and on a rainy day in June of 2022, miner Travis Mudry was working away to extract some. Since the mines are covered in permafrost, he had to dig into a wall of hard, frozen dirt, and while doing so, he made a crazy discovery. Inside the muck, he spotted a dark, shiny animal with short legs. Suspecting he'd found a mummified baby buffalo, Mudry began inspecting the creature. However, he was in for a shock after he realized that the animal had a trunk. Upon showing his boss, all work was stopped and the experts were called in. While Grant Zazula, the Yukon government's paleontologist, wasn't able to arrive right away, he sent 2 geologists who rushed to the creek, surveyed the site, and retrieved the remains less than an hour before a storm struck. Once secure, the mammoth was wrapped in a tarp and brought to a nearby location for a ceremony with scientists, miners, politicians, and First Nations elders. Gathered in a circle, the elders offered a blessing and named the mammoth Nunchoga, which means big baby animal in their language. After a quick examination, they ruled that Nunchoga was female, who was probably about a month old when she passed away more than 30,000 years ago. Based on where she was found, it's more than likely that she was grazing with her mother when she strayed from her mother's side and got stuck in the mud, leading to her death. Now, the reason why Nunchoga was so well preserved is likely due to her quick passing and the unique location of her final moments. You see, in most parts of the world, only the fossilized bones of Ice Age creatures remain. However, in the Yukon, permafrost acts as a sort of freezer, preserving soft tissues like muscles, skin, and hair, alongside the important information like DNA. It's because of this that in recent decades, miners in territory have unearthed the well-preserved remains of several different animals, with their findings including a wolf pup, a caribou calf, and giant camels. In any case, Nunchoga now holds the title of being the first complete baby woolly mammoth found in North America, and only the second in the world. As such, her discovery was an incredible stroke of luck, and of great importance to the scientific and archaeological community. Moving on to number 7, an AC-53 Skytrooper Dakota. On November 18th of 1946, a C-53 Skytrooper Dakota took off from Tulln Air Base near Vienna, Austria, bound for Pisa in northern Italy. The plane was carrying several high-ranking Allied officers and their families, and so in order to play it safe, Captain Ralph Tate Jr. decided to take a 2-day-long route that would take them through Munich and Marseille in order to avoid bad weather. This ended up being an ill-advised plan. That's because somewhere around Innsbruck, the plane got caught in bad weather anyways, causing the pilots to become disoriented and go off course. They knew they were in the Alps because Tate had to dodge several mountain peaks. However, they mistakenly thought they were in the French Alps and not the Austrian Alps. At some point, a downdraft sent them towards yet another peak, and in order to save everyone on board, Tate intentionally dropped the airplane, pancaking it onto the Gully Glacier. The plane skidded on its belly uphill for a short while before thankfully getting stuck in a snowbank. This slowdown caused the plane to stop a few hundred meters short of a deep crevasse, ensuring that everyone remained safe. The good news was that only the serious injury among the passengers was a compound leg fracture. The bad news was that 12 of them were now stuck about 3,200 meters up in the Alps in late November. Thankfully though, despite the rough landing, the radio still worked. However, because the radio signals deflected off the mountains, the B-17 bombers sent to look for them didn't pick them up. It was because of this that it took a grand total of 3 days for the US and British Air Forces to locate the lost plane, with the eventual finder being, according to some sources, none other than the captain's dad, who spotted the plane after he sent up a flare. With the help of local Swiss Alpine soldiers, all the passengers who were aboard were saved, giving this story a happy ending. So this leaves us with the obvious question: what happened to the plane? Well, after the incident, the plane was simply left on the glacier and mostly forgotten about. However, in 2012, 3 university students from Canada found the C-53's propeller while hiking the glacier. They first thought it was a log protruding from the ice, but after investigating realized that it was a plane propeller. This find soon grabbed local headlines, and as the glacier continues to melt, it's likely that it will reveal more and more relics from this crash. Number 6. Antarctic ice holes. In October of 2017, scientists were in for a shock when a strange hole opened up in the middle of Antarctica's winter sea ice. Now, what made this hole so shocking is that it was very atypical, massive in size. It was about as large as the US state of Maine and seemingly come out of nowhere. As you might imagine, scientists got to studying it, and they soon determined that it was a polynya. In essence, a polynya forms because the deep water in that part of the Southern Ocean is warmer and saltier than the surface water. Ocean currents can at times bring the warmer water upwards, where it melts the blankets of ice that had formed on the ocean's surface. That melting created the polynya. To make matters worse, since the water in the hole is continuously exposed to the atmosphere above, it makes it difficult for new ice layers to form. While we know how polynyas work, there's still a lot of mystery surrounding them. First and foremost, they tend to occur on the coast where ice is close to non-frozen seawater. However, in this case, the polynya opened up very deep in the interior of the continent, puzzling scientists. We still have little idea of what long-term impacts of a polynya are, and whether they can cause serious harm to the local environment. There are even suggestions that they may be linked to climate change, although this is yet to be definitively proven. Using data from satellites, autonomous floats, and tagged marine animals, the team determined that a turbulent eddy around Maud Rise brought more salt into the sea, which was then transferred to the surface through a process called Ekman transport. They then determined that the polynyas formed in this way can have quite the impact, as they can change how water moves around and how currents carry heat towards Antarctica. Number 5. Iron Age skis. While humans from the Iron Age were far different than we are today, one thing that they did have was, of all things, skis. And in 2014, a team of scientists found a single archaic ski in Norway's national park. 7 years later, a matching ski was found just a few meters away and in even better condition than its counterpart. Now, it's worth mentioning that skis have a rather long history. The archaeological record suggests that hunters in Europe and Asia began using skis to chase game around the end of the last ice age, about 11,000 years ago. To date, the oldest confirmed ski, which was unearthed in Russia, is about 8,000 years old, and periodically archaeologists in Scandinavia have found wooden skis and ski-like artifacts to date as early as 3200 BC. Now, the skis in question are no older than what we found before. In fact, they're believed to be a relatively young set at just 1,300 years old. What makes them stand out and earn a spot on this list is the condition. Measuring in at about 188 centimeters long and about 18 centimeters wide, the skis are sizable, and according to the measurement, the second ski is slightly larger than the first. According to archaeologist Lars Pilo of Norway's Glacier Archaeology Program, quote, "The skis are not identical, but we should not expect them to be. The skis are handmade, not mass-produced. They have a long and individual history of wear and repair before Iron Age skiers used them together, and they ended up in the ice," end quote. Beyond their size, the skis are also notable for their features. Both have raised footholds, leather straps, and twisted birch bark bindings that would have been attached through holes in the footholds. It's believed that the ski's owner was a hunter, traveler, or both, and the find shows that despite being geographically remote, the high mountains of southern Norway were teeming with activity 1,300 years ago. It seems like this set of skis is also a bit different than what has typically been found. After the discovery of the first ski, the team wondered whether its underside had once been lined with fur. This would have been done, theoretically, to give the skis more grip. However, the new skis seem to have a furrow like those found on some other ancient and modern skis. This furrow would have no purpose if covered with fur, leading researchers to believe that the skis didn't feature any of it. Number 4. Ancient viruses. While it may sound crazy, it turns out that viruses can survive under ice for thousands of years. Now, it's practically impossible to know how many ancient viruses are frozen and how many have already been quietly unleashed. However, there are some that scientists have picked up on. It's worth noting that so far, scientists have only studied permafrost viruses that infect single-cell organisms called amoebas. This is because the viruses are harmless and provide a good model for those others that may be lurking under the ice. As put by computational biologist Jean-Michel Clavier, we will never risk isolating a virus eventually capable of infecting modern mammals. We do not have any formal proof that viruses other than amoeba-specific viruses could survive as long, but there would be no reason why not, because all viruses basically have the same property of being inert particles while outside their host cells. We do not wish to take the immense risk of starting a new pandemic with unknown zombie viruses from the distant past just to demonstrate that we're right." End quote. So here's some of the so-called safe viruses that have been found so far. One is Pythovirus cyberisum. Considered to be one of the largest viruses ever found, this 1.5 millimeter long monstrosity is a thick-walled oval with an opening at one end, a cork structure as a cap, and a honeycomb-like grid. Now, this virus was discovered inside a core of an ancient Siberian permafrost in the Russian Far East, and it's believed to be about 30,000 years old. Malavirus cyberisum is a second virus that's quite similar to the first, found in the same 30,000-year-old Siberian permafrost sample. It's a slightly smaller one and protected by a hairy outer layer. What's interesting about this one is that if it infects an amoeba, it can produce and release 200 to 300 new viral particles for every single virus. While it also poses no danger to humans or other animals, the discovery of 2 ancient viruses in a single sample suggests that dormant pathogens often lurk in permafrost. However, the oldest virus found in permafrost so far is Pandoravirus yedoma. Dating back to 48,500 years ago, it was found in icy deposits in the Russian Far East, and it's notable for having a large egg-shaped particle that measures in at 1 micrometer in length. Now, while all these viruses are kinda cool, their great variability means it's also that quite likely a few of them will be dangerous. After all, there is a very real chance that the next COVID or SARS is hiding deep in that ice. If the ice melts, it could infect those in the north of our planet before heading south, catching most of the planet by surprise. As such, it's important that we constantly monitor new viruses in the Arctic to make sure that this terrifying possibility does not become a reality. Number 3. Glacier Girl. On July 15th of 1942, a squadron of 6 P-38 Lightning fighter planes and 2 B-17 Flying Fortress bombers got caught in a blizzard while flying from Greenland to the British Isles. As a result, they had no choice but to turn back and conduct an emergency landing on the glaciers of Greenland. While all of the crew members were rescued, 9 days later, the aircraft were left behind. For some reason or another, they were never retrieved over the course of the war, and instead they sat there for decades. Over this time period, the ever-shifting ice sheets buried the aircraft under 75 to 90 meters of ice. However, despite their remote, hard-to-reach location, 50 years later the decision was made to extract one of the P-38 fighters from the ice. Nicknamed Glacier Girl, the effort was pretty huge. Taking a whopping 11 years and about $2 million, the crew had to spend a lot of time and effort to lift the plane out of the ice. This excavation was possible because they made use of a large heat plate, which melted the ice and allowed them to tunnel down to the aircraft. From there, a cavern was cleared out around the plane with blasts of hot water, allowing individual pieces to be resurfaced. Surprisingly, the plane was in decent condition. While the canopy was crushed by the ice, all parts were more or less in place. After a $500,000 repair effort, the plane was in workable condition, and in October of 2002, she embarked on her first flight. However, it was on June 22, 2007 that the Glacier Girl went on a rather ambitious flight. The plan was that she would depart from Teterboro Airport in New Jersey and attempt to fly across the Atlantic Ocean to Duxford in England, with the idea being she would complete the flight that she had begun 65 years earlier. However, on June 28th, a coolant leak in the right engine grounded the plane in Goose Bay, which is a town in northeastern Canada. In any case, the successful excavation of Glacier Girl made it seem like the second plane could be recovered, and in 2011 an effort began to do just that. With the help of ground-penetrating radar mounted onto drones, the team involved were able to detect one of the P-38s and determine that it was a plane known as Echo by its pilots. As of 2018, the plan was to go to Greenland in 2019 and use the same heating strategy that was used in '92 to excavate it. However, to date, there seems to be no confirmation online as to whether or not the excavation of this second plane actually occurred. Number 2. Ötzi. When you think of a mummy, the long-gone rulers and nobles of ancient Egypt are probably the ones who come to mind. However, in 1991, a frozen mummy of sorts was found high up in the mountains. The story goes that 2 German tourists were hiking in the Ötztal Alps on the border of Austria and Italy when they came across a mummy. After being extracted, the mummy was examined at the University of Innsbruck, and rather incredibly, he was soon nicknamed Ötzi and determined to be the oldest natural mummy in Europe. After further examination, he was determined to have lived somewhere between 3350 and 3105 BC, making him more than 5,000 years old. While this should have led to decomposition, the extremely cold temperatures in the Alps preserved it incredibly well. The scientists involved were able to figure out that Ötzi was about 5'2", left-handed, wore a size 8 shoe, and had brown eyes, dark brown hair, and tan skin, suggesting that he was of Southern European heritage despite being located in the Alps. Unfortunately, he was in pretty bad shape physically, as he was lactose intolerant, had a rare genetic anomaly that prevented his 12th pair of ribs from forming, and he also suffered from cavities, intestinal parasites, and Lyme disease, and had a sore back alongside sore knees, hips, and shoulders, meaning he likely lived in continuous pain. Despite all this, he still decided to hike through the Alps, and by all accounts, his journey seemed pretty frantic. Scientists were able to find his belongings and figured out he was dressed in warm clothes. However, it appears that all he carried was a backpack, axe, dagger, a bow, arrows, and a small quantity of food. As a result, it seems like he must have been hunting and gathering as he made his way through this rocky terrain. It's also worth mentioning that while the remains were examined in Austria, both the remains and his paraphernalia are now located in Italy. The reasons for this have to do with geopolitics. You see, at the Treaty of Saint-Germain-en-Laye in 1919, the border between North Tyrol and Austria and South Tyrol and Italy was defined as the watershed of the rivers Inn and Etsch. However, the glacier which Ötzi was found on had since retreated, complicating the decision as to whether to find the site was Italian or Austrian. In '91, land surveys were conducted, and while it was determined that while Ötzi's find site drains to the Austrian side, the body was actually located 93 meters inside Italy. Thankfully, both sides agreed to be civil, while the Italians allowed Innsbruck University to finish the scientific examinations. From '98 onwards, Ötzi has been on display in Italy's South Tyrol Museum of Archaeology. Number 1. The HMS Investigator. In 1848, Sir John Franklin officially disappeared. Given his status as a famous Arctic explorer, it caused quite the commotion, and soon Britain's Arctic Council began setting up search parties and offering large sums of reward money in order to find him. While some clues were found, it wasn't until July of 2010 that most of the mystery was solved. For a bit of context, at around this time the British Navy was very much invested in finding the Northwest Passage. While it was only fabled to exist, the hope was that by finding a way to get from the Atlantic to the Pacific through the Arctic, shipping between the two oceans could be far faster. After all, during this time period, the Panama Canal didn't exist yet, forcing ships to sail around the bottom of South America. Given the fact that this was rather dangerous, the hope was that a Northwest Passage would be far safer. The expedition of Sir John Franklin was one of the attempts made in order to find this seaway. In 1845, a 59-year-old Franklin and his crew embarked on the journey with their ships, known as the HMS Erebus and HMS Terror. Right from the get-go, there were problems. After all, the food was improperly sealed, leading to much of it to get contaminated with lead, and while the crew managed to make it through the winter of 1845, in '46, the boats got stuck in the ice. While the ships had what should have been 3 years of provisions, the contamination made much of it inedible, and after 2 years with no news, Sir Franklin's wife asked the British Admiralty to conduct a search. All the searches didn't come up with much. Only written evidence to ever be found was the so-called Victory Point Note. Written in 2 parts, it recounted how the crew spent years trapped in the ice from 1846 to 48. Unfortunately, the second part of the note recounts that Sir John Franklin passed away on June 11th of 1847, and it's believed that this note itself was written by surviving crew members as late as 1848. Now, while all these men were lost, for years, what many historians hoped to find was the ship itself. It turns out that for a while, the Inuit knew the location. These are Canada's native people who hail from the Arctic, and in their oral history, they have stories of how they would use the abandoned ship as a source of copper and iron. However, this apparently didn't last for long, and just after a year, the ship sank into the water, and from then on, it was unclear where the exact location was. However, in July of 2010, this all changed. That's because it was during this month that Parks Canada sent a team of scientists and surveyors to look for their ship. After breaking the ice on July 25th, the crew decided to test their underwater scanner, and in an incredible stroke of luck, the scanner happened to find a ship in the scanner's testing spot. The ship was neither the Erebus nor the Terror, rather it was the HMS Investigator. This was a ship that went to look for the Franklin expedition in 1853. However, after getting stuck in the ice, it subsequently sank to the bottom. In any case, thanks to the fortunate find on the first test run, the entire investigation only took a few minutes, and from there the crew were able to spend a good amount of time taking pictures of the wreckage and assessing it. From then on, Parks Canada got emboldened. In 2014, they managed to find the HMS Erebus, and in 2016, they found the Terror using the same technology. Just this year, excavations began on HMS Erebus, and to date, hundreds of artifacts have been unearthed. And an interesting side note, it's also worth mentioning that this find strengthens Canada's historical and geographic claim to the Northwest Passage. This is because the finding of the ships exploring it as far back as the mid-1800s makes it clear that British, and now by inheritance Canadian ships were in the area far before the Americans. As such, while America may periodically try to assert the Northwest Passage as being theirs due to the ownership of Alaska, the reality is that this is a weak argument at best, and disingenuous at worst. Thanks for watching, everyone. I hope to see you next time. Thank you to our channel members.